Dear delegates, hello to you all. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our information session, which is on the climate change policy. And without further delay, I would like to give the floor to our Assistant Director General, Mr. Ottone, please.
Thank you, Mechtil. Good morning. Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you today on the occasion of this information meeting. You may recall that during the information meeting on the 30th, 2020, we announced that further meetings would be organized to present two major matters which are on the agenda of the extended 44th session of the World Heritage Committee. The first of those meetings took place on 18 January and was dedicated to the reflection on sites associated with memories of recent conflicts and other negative and devised memories. The second one, which brings us together today, is devoted to the presentation of the draft update policy document on the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties. It's important to remember that the original version of which was adopted in 2007. Climate change is indeed the defining issue of our times, and its impact on heritage is today more apparent than ever. In every part of the globe, cultural and natural heritage sites are threatened by increasing bushfires, droughts, floods, storms, and ocean acidification, while the uprooting of communities due to the climate change is putting entire ways of life at risk. This includes the practice and transmission of living heritage, for sure, oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, and festival events. Heritage has an essential role as a dynamic force for changing minds. This requires strengthening our action for the protection of natural and cultural heritage impacted by climate change, especially in the most vulnerable countries and regions, such as small island developing states and in the African continent. Considering its distinctive mandate in the fields of education, science, and culture, UNESCO is uniquely placed to respond to these challenges through a multidisciplinary approach and to engage in capacity building efforts to support countries to respond to climate-related disasters and their impact on heritage. UNESCO has been sounding the alarm on the threats posed by climate change to cultural and natural heritage among the international community. That include the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit in New York and the COP25 in Madrid. Building on its 2018-2021 strategy for climate action and its 2017 declaration of ethical principles in relation to climate change, as well as its 6th convention in the field of culture, UNESCO has long been working to safeguarding our heritage from the effects of climate change, promoting its power for climate change mitigation and adaptation, and its key role as a source of resilience. Indeed, heritage is more than just an asset. It is a fundamental resource to respond to the global crisis caused by climate change and the related loss of biodiversity. It contributes greatly to people's well-being and is instrumental in crafting sustainable development futures. UNESCO is very much involved and committed to address this matter as one of its priorities, and it's heading several initiatives on heritage and climate change alongside its partners. During its 2009 session in early July last year, members of the Executive Board demonstrated a high interest in the action undertaken by UNESCO on climate action. They also called for the further development of strong partnership, such as with the UNFCCC, and actions to strengthen UNESCO's role in the implementation of the 2015 Paris Agreement. In this regard, I'm pleased to recall that in the UN Secretary General's report of September 2019, Climate Action Summit, UNESCO was assigned as the lead agency to ensure the follow-up of the initiative on the protection of cultural and natural heritage from climate change proposed by Greece. Also, we are closely collaborating with Greece on the establishment and implementation of the flexible mechanism. As you may know, on the eve of the 52nd session of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was hosted at UNESCO, we launched a reflection group on culture and climate change in February 2020. This reflection group allowed us to start a discussion with a number of global experts from the field of climate change, culture, and science on the role of culture as a key resource for climate change mitigation and adaptation. As a follow-up, UNESCO, the IPCC, and ICOMOS joined forces to co-sponsor an international expert meeting on culture, heritage, and climate change, which will take place online early December 2021, with the end goal of developing strategic recommendations to ensure that culture is fully acknowledged and integrated in the international climate agenda. The growing recognition of the role of culture for action was also made evident during the recent G20 presided by Italy in April 2021, the webinar on addressing the climate crisis through culture, in which UNESCO participated and was hosted by Mechtil Rossler. Addressing the impact of climate change on heritage in this make or break year and in these years to come will require UNESCO as a laboratory of ideas to offer the member states tangible solutions for integrating culture and natural heritage into their national climate change policies and responses. I am convinced that the draft updated policy document on the impact of climate change on World Heritage properties, which is the result of a long consultation and discussion process between all stakeholders of the World Heritage Convention, will fully contribute to this. I will now give the floor to the director of the World Heritage Center, Madame Mechtil Rossler, to present the background of this work and the process followed. Presentation of the updated policy document will follow, delivered by two international experts with whom we also have the privilege to work as member of UNESCO's Reflection Group on Culture and Climate Change and the Scientific Steering Committee for the joint UNESCO, IPCC, and ICOMOS initiative. Thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for this introduction. It's now my pleasure to provide you with the full background and the process. And I'm very pleased to note that we have now 102 participants in this online meeting. Now, the issue of impacts of climate change on World Heritage natural and cultural properties was brought to the attention of the World Heritage Committee in 2005, maybe you remember, in South Africa, by a group of concerned organizations and individuals. The committee at the time requested the center, in collaboration with the advisory bodies, interested states parties and petitioners, to convene a broad working group of experts to review the nature and the scale of risks arising from climate change and prepare a strategy and report for dealing with this issue. Now, the group of experts prepared a report on predicting and managing the effects of climate change on World Heritage, as well as a strategy to assist state parties to the convention to implement appropriate management responses. The committee reviewed and endorsed these two documents at the 30th session of the committee, which was in Vilnius in 2006, and with the related decision, which you see on the screen, and requested all states parties to implement a strategy so as to protect the outstanding universal value of World Heritage sites. The committee further requested at the time the World Heritage Center to develop, through a consultative process, a draft policy document on the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties, to be presented to its 31st session and discussed subsequently at the General Assembly of States Parties in 2007. Accordingly, a working group meeting comprising several experts and representatives of convention secretariats was convened by the World Heritage Center at UNESCO headquarters in February 2007. The draft policy document was then discussed at the World Heritage Committee session in Christchurch in 2007 and the views expressed by the World Heritage Committee were incorporated, and the revised policy document was presented then to the General Assembly of States Parties at its 16th session in 2007. The General Assembly then adopted the policy document and strongly recommended its use by all concerned. At its 32nd session, which was the year afterwards in Quebec in 2008, the committee also decided to amend the operational guidelines to take into account the issue of climate change with regard to the list of World Heritage in danger, as indicated in the 2007 policy document. Since then, climate change has been a recurring conservation issue affecting the World Heritage properties around the world. In its decision 39-7, which was taken in 2015 at the committee session in Bonn, the committee acknowledged that World Heritage properties are increasingly affected by climate change, and it encouraged states parties to participate in the 21st Conference of Parties, the COP21, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, in December 2015, with a view to achieving a universal climate agreement and mobilize global climate action on the ground. Since the adoption of the policy document, numerous reports on the state of conservation of World Heritage properties located in all regions were presented to the World Heritage Committee in relation to climate change impacts. And you can check this also with our excellent World Heritage conservation database. If you type in climate change, you can see which properties are affected by climate change. Therefore, at the 40th session in 2016, and aware that knowledge related to adaptation and mitigation to climate change had drastically increased over the past 10 years, the committee requested the World Heritage Center and the advisory bodies to periodically review and update the policy document so as to make available the most current knowledge and technology on the subject to guide the decisions and actions of the World Heritage community. Now, an international expert workshop took place in October 2017 at the Academy for Nature Conservation on the island of Wilm in Germany to discuss the challenges posed by climate change to conservation management of World Heritage sites. And the meeting brought together 20 international heritage experts on climate change from 15 countries with the aim to discuss the revision of the 2007 policy document. The World Heritage Center then developed a project with the objective to propose the updated policy document for consideration by the World Heritage Committee and to ensure its widespread communication and dissemination to all stakeholders concerned. I would like to express here our gratitude to the State Party of the Netherlands for its generous support. The World Heritage Center, with the assistance of the advisory bodies, identified then 2 senior consultants to assist in this task. And you see them on the photo here. They are also both here with us, so I'm very happy to see them. First of all, Mr. Rohit Chigiasu, who is working on cultural heritage, who is a conservation architect and risk management professional, president of e-commerce India from 2014 to 17, and he has been working with several national and international organizations, UNESCO, the World Bank, and the Getty Conservation Institute, and he now works for ICCROM, where he provides a specialized knowledge in the areas of disaster risk management for cultural heritage. And then we have Mr. Oscar Javier Cuevrava Arevalo, who is an expert in natural heritage. Oscar is a civil engineer in environmental and natural resources economics and in risk and disaster management. And he has been an advisor and consultant to numerous public institutions, private and multilateral organizations on climate change, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity, protected areas, etc. He has also been a senior advisor on climate change for the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, and a focal point at WWF, Colombia's on climate and energy, and a co-chair of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, a climate change specialist group. And he has been actively involved in international policy work on biodiversity, climate change, and World Heritage. So I'm happy that both of them are with us here today, and they will speak in a short moment. As a part of the updating process, an important desk review of all existing documentation was also undertaken. The World Heritage Center launched a wide online consultation of all stakeholders of the World Heritage Convention, including states, parties, site managers, local communities, indigenous peoples, academics, NGOs, civil society, and the center and the advisory bodies to gather feedback and comments from key World Heritage stakeholders of the convention on this very crucial matter. Now, in addition, a technical advisory group was established with the assistance of the chairpersons of UNESCO's electoral groups to assist in defining a clear roadmap on the lead up to the presentation of the updated policy document to the committee next July. This group met several times online to review the draft updated policy document prepared by the two experts to address the potential different viewpoints or approaches and to provide further guidance. The zero draft was then shared with all states parties to the convention on 23rd of March, so that you could all see the basis of the discussions of the technical advisory group and formulate comments via the representatives of your respective regional groups in this meeting. The zero draft was then discussed by the technical advisory group at the end of April, early June 2020. And following these meetings and all the comments received, I have to inform you, we got over 150 pages of comments. A second draft was prepared and discussed during the group meeting in July, and the third draft was prepared and discussed at the last meeting, which took place in September 2020. Now, after a long process of revision and proofreading, the final draft of the updated policy document was circulated to all states parties on the 4th of June 21 on the occasion of the first dispatch of the documents. And in the meantime, we had shared with all state parties already an outline of the updated text at the end of November 2020. It is now my great pleasure to give the floor to Rohit to briefly present the outcomes of the online consultation, which provided valuable inputs to this updating exercise. Rohit, please.
Thank you very much, Bechdel. So I will just share the screen. Yeah, there is already the presentation on the screen. So, so we had very good consultation with all the key stakeholders, and this consultation lasted from 30 December 2019 to 31st January 2020. Next slide, please. So our questions were organized around 5 main areas, basically on personal information, awareness and involvement of the 2007 policy. We even asked the participants of the questionnaire on the general views on the climate change impacts and measures for greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation for World Heritage properties. And then section D focused on suggestions for strengthening synergies between the World Heritage Convention and climate action. And then the last section was on the key elements of the updated policy. Next slide, please. If you see here, in terms of the percentage of countries, we had around 23% from Europe, and then we had around 13% from Southeast Asia, Southeast European countries, Latin American countries, we had 21%, Asia Pacific region 17%, and so it was fairly equally distributed, as you can see from this graph. And in terms of responses, we received nearly half of the responses came from Western Europe and North America, while the rest came from the other regions of the world. Next slide, please. So here you can see how 366 responses that we received were kind of distributed in terms of responses coming from the state parties, from the advisory bodies, from the World Heritage Site, World Heritage Center, NGOs, academic research. So you can see here that even we got some responses from indigenous peoples. And so you can see that we try to cover as diverse section as we could, ranging from the state parties to indigenous peoples. And you can also see in terms of gender distribution, it was fairly equally distributed. Next slide, please. Here you can see how the distribution among the respondents was in terms of the cultural heritage, natural heritage, mixed heritage, but we also involved experts from climate change side. So we had experts who were speaking on climate change mitigation, adaptation, legal matters, climate science. So again, we try to cover a diverse range of professionals and experts, and so that we can get a much wider response. Next slide, please. So this tells us about the usefulness of the 2007 policy document, and as you can see here, most people really found the 2007 policy pretty useful. Some even said it is very highly useful. So there was quite a bit of acceptance on the and acknowledgement of the usefulness of 2007 policy. Next slide, please. So here you can see the importance of climate change related issues to achieve the objectives of the World Heritage Convention. And you can see that most people were saying whether that this is critically important, it is of high significance, and therefore these issues really need to be really addressed because they are in line with the objectives of the convention. Next slide, please. This is a very useful slide because it shows how our respondents spoke about in what way climate change is currently impacting World Heritage properties. And you can see here that different kinds of effects of climate change have been listed by our respondents, ranging from extreme rainfall events to precipitation change, changes in air temperature, sea level rise, humidity change, storm intensity and frequency. So we could cover a diverse range of impacts on World Heritage properties due to climate change. Next slide, please. The next three slides actually tell us how climate-related impacts have been experienced in terms of the impact, the specific impacts on World Heritage properties. Many people have mentioned costs of property maintenance and management because of these impacts. There is also direct damage to historic built fabric or created landscape features. Also accelerated and progressive deterioration of historic built fabric, and impact on tourism but these four were really quite high in terms of the percentage of respondents mentioning these as the impacts on World Heritage properties. Besides those, next slide please, the impacts were also mentioned on biodiversity, on the local communities or indigenous peoples, changes in the landscapes, the shortages of water, degradation of outstanding universal value, and then also loss or degradation of intangible heritage was mentioned as an effect. Next slide please. Some other effects were economic losses, including poverty, hunger of associated communities, also impacts on the geological heritage, for example, loss of glaciers, forced migration or displacement of people, diminished capacity to address development needs of local communities, and increased risk of social and other conflicts or violence were also mentioned as effects of climate change on World Heritage properties. Next slide, please. So this is quite an insightful slide, I would say, because it in fact tells us that in terms of the challenges to effective implementation of measures for addressing climate change issues in the management of World Heritage properties, respondents mainly mentioned these in three different categories. One category was definitely lack of financial and human resources, as you can see on the one which is highlighted in red. But then lack of capacities was also mentioned as one of the key aspects in terms of the climate change related issues which affect the management of the properties. So here you can see the absence of knowledge or inability or lack of capacity to assess and monitor climate change impacts, and also not having enough models to really work with was also mentioned in terms of the lack of capacities. But also policies or legislations was also highlighted as one of the key effect or the issue which is related to climate change. And these could be in terms of lack of implementation of policies or lack of political support or even lack or weak enabling legislation, so or enabling institutional frameworks. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, we asked actually the respondents which elements should be prioritized as climate mitigation topics in the updated policy document, because this was very useful for us to really address whatever is coming out of these questions in the way we worked on the updated document that has been shared with you. So as you can see here, 74% of respondents said that it is important to integrate World Heritage properties into local and national climate mitigation policies. So policy was definitely highlighted at the national level, using traditional knowledge and heritage values or methodologies associated into World Heritage properties to communicate best practices in mitigation strategies and to drive mitigation ambitions was also highlighted as an important area to look at. The other areas were using traditional knowledge and heritage values for designing different adaptation actions to enhance the resilience of local communities, precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent, or minimize the causes of climate change, measuring carbon footprint on World Heritage so that it can inform the management, greenhouse gas mitigation, and through different measures including low carbon management of World Heritage properties and improved management of biosphere carbon sinks. Next slide, please. So in this next slide, we asked them about their prioritization in terms of climate adaptation topics that should be considered in the updated policy document. And in that context, monitoring and reporting impacts of climate change on the impacts on OUV of the properties, assessing future impacts were really quite highlighted in terms of the percentage of respondents. Also, climate adaptation through improved integration of World Heritage properties into local and national adaptation, disaster risk reduction and emergency response policies, and also importance of awareness raising, climate adaptation through improved World Heritage properties and its surroundings, managing the land and seascape, and also state of conservation recommendations should also respond to climate change impact on World Heritage properties, and the use of traditional knowledge systems. These were kind of the areas that were pretty much emphasized by the respondents during the survey. Next slide, please. So here we asked the respondents to prioritize the topics or the areas in the new policy document. And in terms of priorities, as you can see, there was a lot of mention on the scientific and technological information that is needed to assess the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties, awareness building and capacity building were also highlighted. As you can see, 60% of the respondents really highlighted that part, but also to have indicators for monitoring climate change drivers and and impacts which have been also, for example, highlighted in UNESCO 2030 indicators. Also addressing World Heritage property management, potential for loss of heritage values as a consequence of climate change, and the legal aspects were also quite touched upon in terms of the priority areas that should be covered in the updated document. Next slide, please. So in this case, we asked in this question, who should be most engaged to formulate and implement these actions and priorities? And as you can see, 88% respondents mentioned national governments, that they should be really involved. But then 67% mentioned local authorities, and another 66% also mentioned intergovernmental organizations. But then NGOs, indigenous peoples and communities, tourism industry, and financial institutions were also mentioned as those who should be engaged in the process of formulation and implementation of these different actions and priorities. Next slide, please. So in this question, this was very useful for us because it was meant to highlight those gaps that are there in the existing 2007 policy document. And many people really mentioned to us that this policy functions as an international tool for climate change, but it does not provide guidance on implementation at regional, national, and property levels. Another gap was that it does not recognize direct and indirect impacts of climate change on communities and intangible heritage of World Heritage properties. Guidance on adaptive management is missing, and then practical recommendations and guidelines to mitigate climate change impacts on World Heritage properties should be incorporated. It was also emphasized that the policy is only available in English and French, and they need other regional languages. So let's move to the next slide, which is on the key recommendations for the updated policy document. So I'll quickly mention these important points. One was that a thematic approach with respect to different climate change factors and hazards and addressing different typologies of heritage should be there. It was also mentioned that there should be consideration given to the vulnerability of intangible heritage due to impacts of climate change, and reflect the interconnectedness between nature and culture. Emphasize on risk assessment of World Heritage properties due to climate change. That was also kind of emphasized. Develop and update baseline data for assessing the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties, and encourage states parties to actively participate in monitoring, adapting, mitigating, and responding to climate change impacts. Next slide, please. It was also mentioned that there needs to be development of monitoring systems which can help us understand the potential impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties. Very importantly, it was mentioned that there should be synergy with latest international conventions, especially those that have really been came in the last couple of years, such as Paris Agreement, emphasizing improved capacity for integrating climate mitigation and adaptation for management and conservation of World Heritage properties. And importance of traditional knowledge on climate change was also something that was emphasized to be included in the new policy, updated policy document. It was also emphasized that the importance of community participation should be there for adaptation and mitigation of climate change, and the nomination dossiers, periodic reporting, state of conservation reports should articulate vulnerability and risks of World Heritage properties due to climate change. That was also kind of mentioned as a recommendation. Next slide, please. So it was suggested that the climate change mitigation and adaptation should be integrated in the management plan and management system of World Heritage properties. There should be, as I mentioned earlier, more articulated synergy between international and regional conventions and national and local policies for climate change and heritage. There's need to develop tools and procedures for climate risk assessment, mitigation, adaptation. Also, to strengthen national and local legislations, provide mechanisms for implementation, especially at the property level, and disseminate knowledge and information through good practices. And then it was also suggested that the updated policy document should be really translated into various regional languages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rohit, for the presentation of the analysis of the questionnaire and all the recommendations we got. Now we are getting into the presentation of the draft updated policy document itself. So the floor is yours to present to us the purpose and the scope of the updated document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we, in the first part of the policy document, the preamble, we divided them into three parts: overview, purpose and scope, and the guiding principles. And I'll briefly take you through the key highlights of each of these subsections. So let's go to the next slide. In the overview, we have provided historical background of 2007 policy document. It also illustrates the new evidence on the magnitude of threats to climate change based on IPCC reports, based on other scientific work done recently. And also it kind of relates how climate change is connected to unsustainable use of nature, and also how World Heritage properties can actually contribute positively towards reducing climate change impacts. Transformative change has been really emphasized by making World Heritage properties climate neutral, and the connectivity between decision makers, communities, and natural and cultural heritage is kind of going to support transformative change. As I said earlier, we were really got a feedback that we must make synergy with other documents that have been there. So we have made links in this new document with 2030 UN Sustainable Development Agenda, 2015 Paris Agreement, and other policies, that international and regional policies that are of relevance to this subject. And then, of course, engaging local communities to strengthen the resilience for a sustainable future is also something that is really the highlight of the updated policy document. So if we go to the next slide, which is on purpose and scope, we mainly have classified these in terms of providing high-level guidance on enhancing the protection and conservation of OUV through adoption of comprehensive climate action measures, creating synergies, as I was already mentioned, between the objectives and processes, multilateral agreements, and also instruments that are available, to galvanize urgent action in support of transformative change by the state parties, by in fact reflecting these aims in their own national policies that will help in implementation of the convention. And then relevance to all stakeholders and rights holders. And here I would like to emphasize, we specifically mention indigenous peoples and local communities, civil society and private sector. And then the purpose is also to embed it in the existing processes of the convention. Next slide, please. So the guiding principles are adopting a precautionary approach aimed at minimizing the risk, so to be more proactive and to focus on not react, but to minimize the potential impacts in the future as well, anticipate, avoid, and minimize harm to protect the OUV, and use best available knowledge which is generated through different processes, not just single disciplinary processes, but also cross-disciplinary processes, integrating a sustainable development perspective, and promoting global partnership, inclusion, and solidarity are really identified as the key guiding principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rohit, for this presentation. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Oscar to present to you the policy framework of the updated policy document. Oscar, por favor.
Thank you. So the policy framework is divided in 4 sections. And basically there is one important premise is that the whole document is coherent. So basically what is indicated in the framework is that first the long-term vision. So it's essential that every user of the policy actually see that the document has a long-term vision that actually help all the heritage community to understand that this is an action-oriented document, and of course it is expected that it will reach that vision if careful implementation of the actions that are being recommended into the document are actually effective. So in addition to that, the framework has 4 goals. So also the purpose here is that the document is action oriented. So this is why multiple options of goals were discussed, and finally we'll present later which ones were finally selected. Now, of course, there is a section related to the legal framework. And there are 5 elements that are very important as part of the policy framework. And so the first one is recommendations about how assessing climate risk to World Heritage properties. There are 2 dedicated to the main topics of the climate action agenda, so climate adaptation and climate mitigation. The 4th one is very important, especially considering the context and the scope and the purpose and the scope of the World Heritage Conventions, which are knowledge sharing, capacity building, and awareness. And finally, one element that was also discussed and we believe it's very important and is one of the new features in this policy document is about the transformative change. So basically, how this element indicates that not only sorry, is that it is important actually how we understand that small incremental change is not enough if we want to reach the vision and the goals that are being proposed in this policy framework and in others like the Paris Agreement. It's important to think and to understand that the change needs to go beyond. So this is why this section is included. Next one, please. So four very short messages regarding to the policy framework. The first one is that one of the most important consideration is that the policy document is fully anchored in the World Heritage System. So the message here is that it should not be seen as separate or a topic that is not so coherent with the overall World Heritage System. The second one is that since the 2007 document, many things happen in the context of the multilateral agreements. We wanted to make sure that this policy document is linked with those milestones in the multilateral world. So, for example, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, all the Paris Agreement and different World Heritage documents. This also includes the Sendai framework for disaster reduction, etc. So this policy document needs to be linked to that in international context. The third message is that climate policy needs to be linked to the best available climate science. You all know that there has been significant progress over the last years, especially to flagship reports from the IPCC, the 1.5 report, and the latest special reports. Well, all the latest special reports from the IPCC actually are highlighting the importance of understanding and undertaking actions to current and future climate risk. So basically all these latest available climate science is reflected into the context of what is being proposed in the policy document. And finally, I have mentioned this before many times, is that the policy document is action-oriented. So basically is indicating, and I hope that there is a good understanding that the current, that the proposed policy framework indicates through the goals and the different sections that that we expect that the parties of the Heritage Conventions actually implement the action recommended on the document. Next one, please. So about the vision, it's I think it's quite simple in terms of the amount of text that we put together here and we discuss and we all agree, but it's also very challenging. So the vision of the policy document is that each state party understand the current and future potential impacts of climate change. So it's a balance between what is happening now and what we expect in the future. So this is quite important to understand, because sometimes people think that the climate change is a question about the future, the distant future, or sometimes there is a different understanding of how we can be balanced the present and the future. So if the policy can actually undertakes the challenge of being prescriptive about what we can do now and what can we do to prepare for the future. So that's stated here in the vision, is that it understands that parties should take action for both current and future potential impacts. And the second important fact here is that the vision is consistent with the state parties' obligations under the World Heritage Convention to ensure the protection, conservation, and management of the cultural and natural heritage. So I think that's again, I think it's simple, but it's very concrete about what's the vision of the document. Next one, please. There are, as I mentioned before, there are 4 goals. So this section is new from what was proposed in the 2007. The 2007 doesn't have a goals as part of the policy framework. So here in this updated policy, climate policy, it was intentional that by including the goals, there is a clear message here that this policy is action oriented. And the goals reflect that. So we have the first goal that is related about climate risk assessments. It states that by 2030, state parties should develop tools and build capacity needed to assess climate risk, identify potential reversible or irreversible damages to attributes carrying the outstanding and universal value associated with current projected impacts of climate hazards, and to report the resulting climate risk assessments through World Heritage processes. So I think this goal reflects it's a great example of what this policy document is about, because it's oriented to action. It talks about present and future climate risk. It is related with outstanding universal value. And also indicates the importance of reports, the findings of the climate risk assessments. The second goal is about climate adaptation. It says that by 2030, state parties should establish at the national and other appropriate levels and implement at the site level robust climate adaptation frameworks that can demonstrate measurable progress on monitoring of climate hazards, assessing and reducing climate risk and vulnerabilities. So again, it's an action-oriented goal. It recognizes the differences between the different sites and the context of the context of the countries, but also it indicates that it's important that a framework is established in order to understand and implement climate adaptation actions. And actually, the importance that the climate adaptation actions that being undertaken at a site level can actually be effective, and how state parties can demonstrate measurable progress on their climate adaptation agenda. Next one, please. Goal 3 is about climate mitigation. So again, it's recommended that by 2030, state parties should implement at national and at other appropriate levels comprehensive climate mitigation frameworks. So again, we are recommending here that each state party actually establish a framework for measuring and guiding mitigation action. So where appropriate, it can include the different actions to reduce greenhouse emissions. But very important here is that when appropriate, we recommend actions to safeguard natural ecosystems that are carbon sinks. Also being because we all know that natural heritage sites are one of the most important places in the world where natural ecosystems work as carbon sinks. So these natural heritage sites should be protected and be safeguarded also because of their role in climate mitigation. Goal 4 is related with knowledge sharing, capacity building, and awareness. And basically, this goal wants to foster the capacity of World Heritage Sites to fulfill the role of improving education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity in relation to the risk and responses related to climate change impacts. Next one, please. Okay, so over to you, Rohit.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Oscar, for the detailed presentation. Now, Rohit will take us through the important section related to the implementation of this policy document. Maybe we can shorten the presentation a bit, Rohit. I don't know. Please go ahead.
Okay, so as was already highlighted that one of the key recommendations that came through our online consultation was that this document should really give guidance on how to implement, not just talk about the larger issues and what needs to be done, but also take it down to the level of implementation at 3 levels: at the World Heritage Committee level, at the national level, and also at the World Heritage Property level. So this is how this section has been divided, starting with enabling conditions. If you go to the next slide, let me just quickly say that implementation is not possible without having some preconditions addressed, which can include financial aspects, technological innovation, institutional capacity, multi-level governance, and also changes in human behavior. Also needs to be mindful of the inclusive processes by paying attention to the asymmetries, power in power and unequal opportunities. Next, please. So in terms of the World Heritage Committee level recommendations, there has been a couple of them which I'm just highlighting here. Need for a funding strategy to attract resources from public and private sector, ensuring that the operational guidelines and other resource manuals really address climate change, promoting climate action, especially encouraging South-South collaboration, and also really working with those properties that are really most vulnerable to the climate change impacts, strengthening the link between the convention and UNFCCC, both in terms of monitoring and reporting mechanisms, and promoting synergies, of course, as mentioned earlier, between policies and tools, and also consider amendments to the formats used for periodic reporting and state of conservation reports, and also identifying various thematic actions across state parties. Next slide, please. At the national level, again, importance to identify resources through collaboration with the various sectors, including private ones, having again coherence at the national policies level also, and also with the culture sector having much more, and the nature sector having much more collaboration with the other sectors, having the national guidance on World Heritage for cultural and natural heritage that should address this issue. Also develop pilot projects to promote good practices in this area, standardize the data gathering, because that has been identified as one of the key gaps, not being able to really assess the impacts, and for that we need much more sharing of knowledge and the data with regards to the impacts collected at different levels, and developing various tools and and methodologies that can help in assessing the risks, climate change risks, and then implementation of adaptation and mitigation strategies are all the recommendations at the national level. And next slide, please. At the local, at the site level or at the property level, again, the importance of undertaking vulnerability and risk assessments, implementing adaptation strategies at the at the national level. These have to have some kind of a transfer at the property level, prioritizing monitoring of climate hazards, and enhancing the adaptive capacities of the properties, implementing management practices that reduce vulnerability and increases resilience, especially from other pressures such as urbanization and tourism, and engaging with the traditional knowledge holders and local communities, and quantifying or where appropriate reduce or otherwise offset greenhouse gas emissions which are associated with the properties, and knowledge mobilization, education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity building are some of those recommendations that are very, very important at the site level or at the property level. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. As you know, the draft updated policy document also includes a series of annexes, which complete the content and provide, I think, with some very useful information for the stakeholders of the convention. Rohit, please start with a presentation of the Annex 1 of the glossary, please.
Yes, because of the time limitation, I think it is important to get views from all those who are listening to these presentations. I would just mention in this case that we have actually picked up terminologies that have been used from IPCC reports, and so they are all being ratified and agreed internationally from the climate sector. We make an emphasis that these terms might be new to the heritage sector and therefore they need to be understood, and it will in fact improve the communication between the heritage sector, the other and the environment and the climate sector. So we think that these glossary of terms, these terminologies will really help in better communication. And we also have recognized that there are some kind of discrepancies in the use of certain terms. For example, mitigation, which is used in a very different sense in the climate change sector, for example, compared to the
Excuse me, there somebody has
which are used differently in the other sectors. For example, in disaster risk reduction or heritage sector, mitigation has some other kind of different meaning. So it is important to recognize these these differences and need to understand and agree on a common vocabulary to promote collaboration. I'm not going to get into the details, but these are all drawn, as I said, from the IPCC reports, and are also reflected in the document as you read through it. These terminologies have been elaborated and explained. Maybe I should just pass the floor to Oscar for an extra two.
Okay, thank you, Rohit. So very quickly, each annex, apart from the glossary, has recommendations to expand the technical issues regarding to the topics, goals, and actions proposed in the main body of the policy document. So Annex 2 is about the topics that we explore in more detail about adaptation. So it has five main topics related to this issue on how to foster adaptation and resilient building actions. Basically, as you can notice here in the slides, each topic is selected as because of its contribution to reach the goals stated in the policy document. So the first one is about assessing climate risk. So this is one of the key elements of the framework, is how this is essential for each state party to assess climate risk, current and future climate risk. So the second topic is about how climate risk, how to establish or how to develop climate risk management strategies. So it's not only about how to assess climate risk, but actually how to manage those risks. The third one is the importance of the baseline information. So this recommendation is related to how to monitor progress against a baseline, and that baseline, of course, is related to topic A, the climate risk. So how we can how the World Heritage community start or continue assessing climate risk to establish a baseline information about those risks and how effective are the actions to reduce those risks. The fourth topic is about damage and loss of outstanding universal value. So we know, and it is well established by science, that climate will, or is currently, and it is likely that in the future will cause damage and irreversible or probably reversible loss to outstanding universal value. So this topic sets the context about how to undertake actions to understand and to prepare for this loss and damage of OUV. The fifth one is managing for resilience, and this is very important because it's not only how to be reactive to current and future impacts of climate change, but actually how to start or to continue undertaking efforts to increase the resilience of World Heritage properties. Next one, please. The third annex are the recommendations related to climate mitigation. So next one, please. Again, these recommendations are related to the latest technical climate science. And right here, a decision was taken on how to frame the recommendations, basically on the four categories that are used in the climate context, especially on the work led by the UN Framework of Climate Change and the IPCC work, is that the developments and the mitigation framework that is recommended to be established as part of the World Heritage Sites Management actions is linked to four categories. So first one is about the built environment, the second one is land use management, the third one is about life cycle assessment, and the fourth one is about tourism. So actually by selecting and proposing actions on each of these four components, we expect that the majority of the recommendations related to how to first establish the climate mitigation framework and then to start undertaking actions to reduce greenhouse emissions in World Heritage properties can actually be all linked and related to what is being indicated in these four elements of the Annex 3. Next one, please. Over to you, Rohit.
Okay, so the last annexure is focused on the areas for further reflection on knowledge sharing, education, and capacity building. And if you go to the next slide, it is mainly divided into global level actions, the actions at the level of the World Heritage Convention, and the ones which are more at the state level or at the property, state party level or at the property level actions. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the key points at the global level for the future that we are proposing to encourage are on informing the UNFCCC Secretariat and its parties of the impacts of climate change on World Heritage, so that these are included in the guidelines for national communications. Ensuring that capacity building activities on climate risk assessments, reporting, adaptation, and mitigation strategies are coordinated with World Heritage Center, the advisory bodies, and other international organizations and secretariats of conventions. Organization of international and regional workshops to share the knowledge and experience, and establishing networking among state parties, because climate change is not just something that can be solved by countries alone, but requires much more collaboration across different state parties. So that's something we have is important to work further on. Developing communication strategies to inform public and policymakers on climate action for World Heritage properties, and also to promote and share good practices on climate action is also necessary, especially with regards to World Heritage properties. Next slide, please. At the level of the state party and the properties, it's important to collect information and establish national database on the past and existing impacts of climate change on the World Heritage properties, promoting and developing risk and vulnerability maps at the national level, and providing information to decision makers, stakeholders, local communities, users and managers of these properties, and other heritage specialists on different aspects related to climate action for World Heritage properties. Also to develop networks among institutions and professionals from heritage and climate sectors, and undertake various capacity building initiatives, promoting and sharing good practices at the site level, and then encouraging site managers to then provide a feedback at the higher level, so that these could be then reflected in the more national experience. And then that's another thing one can work on. And definitely to continue doing research, undertaking interdisciplinary projects by various academic institutions, and to improve the links between heritage research fields and other areas of climate science is also an important area for further action. Thank you very much. Bechtel, I think you are muted, so we can't hear you.
Can they see us at least? No?
Now it's fine. We can hear you.
Yes.
Now it works? Okay, this microphone works. Now this one works?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. So sorry for that. Many thanks to both Rohit and Oscar for the enlightening presentation of the draft updated document. It's now my pleasure to open the floor to state parties. Should you have any comments or questions you would like to share with us? And I would also like to recall that this is an information meeting to exchange on the draft document, but it's not opening the debate, because this is the prerogative, of course, of the World Heritage Committee at the extended 44th session next month. So please, who wishes to take the floor?
Good afternoon. Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, this is Nigeria, if I understand correctly, please.
Yes, this is Nigeria. I'm Professor Abba Issa Tijani, Director General, National Commission for Museums and Monuments. I want to commend your team for this very rich document, policy document update, which I been following. Is very clear and insightful. I timely, and I want to therefore commend you, and I want us to say, if possible, to circulate for us to go study more details of the policy documents even before it's tabled. I think it will be good for us to read well ahead of this. So I want to commend you for this very good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Nigeria for your comments, and this is very much welcome. We are also pleased that we have finished the document. Just for your information, this was already dispatched with the first dispatch, so you can find this document, which is item 7C, which was sent on the 4th of June, and it's on our webpage. If you click on the 44com, which is all the documents for the committee, this is item 7C, so you can look at it in detail. I see that Germany wishes to take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mechtet, and thank you to the presenters, and congratulations for this great work on this document. I'm really happy that this has been evolving in the last years, and I think not only the latest report published actually a week ago of the IPCC and IPBES, both the international panels on climate change and biodiversity, has, I think, again reinforced these linkages, which are not only important for biodiversity, but also for heritage on a larger scale. I have one concrete question. Do I understand correctly that at this stage the document lays out the different levels of implementation, but it doesn't include at this moment not yet a concrete guidance on, for example, how to perform assessments, vulnerability assessments, and so whatsoever? Because I think it's such a complex issue, and it might need guidance at a later stage for states parties and on site level how to do that. If you could respond to that, I would be very happy to hear from you. And again, thanks to this very informative presentation.
Thank you very much to the question from Germany, Mrs. Engels. Yes, I confirm that this document requires probably further implementation guidance after it has been adopted. As you know, it goes to the World Heritage Committee. The committee may also wish to comment, and then it goes to the General Assembly of States Parties in November. But maybe before giving the floor to other states, maybe Rohit and Oscar, you would like to comment on the question from Mrs. Engels from Germany, please.
Yeah, so I completely agree. In that sense, we even discussed during our expert meetings the very same aspect, that this is not just good in itself. It needs to be followed up with enough guidance. We need to also develop further tools. We need to do a lot more work to take this policy document, which is a more higher level document, to the next to kind of make sure that it somehow goes down to a level where we can see its implementation becoming possible. So this was already discussed, and as Mechtet mentioned, definitely this is required, and if the committee wants, we should be moving to that next level of working on these different tools and guidance documents to help in implementation of this policy. Oscar, maybe you would like to say something?
Yes, thanks, Barbara, for the question. The vision and the purpose of the policy document is that it can be seen as a framework. So basically, the question about the inclusion, especially a section dedicated to goals, is that those goals can be used as a reference for developing a specific technical guidance on actions that can allow state parties to reach those goals and ultimately to reach the vision of the policy document. But of course, there were many discussions about how to about the scope of the policy document itself, because how prescriptive it should be, or it just state the main elements of the policy itself. And at the end, I think that after many hours of discussions and inputs from parties and discussions with experts, etc., is that the text that is being shared and is being considered by the committee, it is balanced in the context that, again, it has not only the policy recommendations, but the actions that are needed to implement the policy are highlighted, are indicated, but not in detail, but in a level that we believe is good enough in order to transmit the message that this document is action-oriented, but without being too prescriptive.
Thank you very much, Rohit. And for your information, in section F, you can find in the document some ideas for further implementation, including some guidance documents. That could be also a discussion at the World Heritage Committee, so they could ask us to work further in this direction. But this is, of course, totally up to the World Heritage Committee. Are there any further questions? I think Greece, yes? Mali first. Okay, Mali, please.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez, je crois?
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Oui, absolument.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. Thank you. And unfortunately, there is a very strong echo that makes it very difficult to hear the speaker. I would like to thank the two speakers for again, the interpreter apologizes, but the sound quality is insufficient to provide accurate interpretation. We apologize, but unfortunately, there's some background noise. Maybe you have a phone next to your speakers. Yes, I apologize, says Mali. Let's see if I can fix the problem. I just wanted to say that this is a good policy document. You hear me? Yes, unfortunately, it is impossible for the interpreters to work because of the background noise. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can, absolutely. I was saying just now that this is a good policy document. It gives us guidelines in terms of assessing the impact of climate change. And we believe that we should try to gather the experiences of all countries to improve even further these documents. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for your comments. Any other? Anyone else wishing to take the floor?
I think the next speaker is Greece, to be followed by Australia. Greece, please.
Hello, thank you, Director, for giving me the floor. I want first of all to thank everyone for this excellent and elaborated presentation. I also want to thank ADG for Culture, Mr. Ernesto Torner, and you personally for your kind words on the initiative, on the Greek initiative on addressing the impact of the climate change on the world cultural and natural heritage. Greece fully supports UNESCO's exemplary involvement in the field of the protection of the world heritage. It is in this context and spirit that that my country has presented in 2019 at the Climate Action Summit its initiative on addressing climate change impacts on cultural and natural heritage. As you know, this proposal received the official support of the United Nations Secretary General, of UNESCO, the World Meteorological Organization, the Council of Europe, and over 100 United Nations member states. Since then, Greece has established the Secretariat of the Flexible Mechanism, which was created to monitor the progress of the implementation of the initiative. And we are working closely with UNESCO in order to move forward with with this mechanism. Furthermore, we would also like to warmly thank UNESCO for the 3 key initiatives currently being implemented in the field of the protection of the World Heritage. Firstly, UNESCO's update of 2007 policy document on the impacts of climate change on World Heritage properties, which will be discussed at the extended 44th session of the World Heritage Committee. Secondly, UNESCO's initiative to co-host with the IPCC and ICOMOS an international expert meeting on the theme of culture, heritage, and climate change in early December 2021, which will bring together representatives of scientific, cultural, and heritage agencies and bodies. And thirdly, UNESCO's important work carried out in the framework of its culture conventions in the field of cultural heritage and creativity through the convention of a reflection group on culture and climate change, which was launched in February 2020. We thank you one more for your excellent presentation and for your pivotal role in the protection of World Heritage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Greece, and thanks for all your efforts also, which were mentioned here. The next intervention is by Australia. Please, Australia.
Thank you, Dr. Rossler, and thank you to the presenters for a very informative presentation this evening, in Australia. This is more of a statement than a question, so with your indulgence, I would like to say a few words. Australia certainly recognises that climate change is a great threat to World Heritage properties, and we welcome the updated policy. We have certainly worked hard with worked in consultation with the committee to help to update it. There's been a lot of work put into this draft, and we do appreciate it, and it's certainly a wicked issue to grapple with for the committee and for UNESCO. Because this is such a significant issue, it is essential that the committee has clear policies and procedures in place to guide decision-making on World Heritage properties. We do appreciate that the revised policy seeks to provide practical site-based guidance for managing the impacts of climate change and enhancing the adaptation and resilience of World Heritage properties. We also support the synergies identified between the World Heritage Convention and other international conventions and programs. In particular, we appreciate the acknowledgement of the separate but complementary mandate of the UNFCCC. However, we do feel there does remain a degree of ambiguity in the current draft, in particular where the policy appears to encroach on the mandate of the Paris Agreement as the appropriate framework through which countries should communicate and report on their nationally determined contributions. We agree there is need for further dialogue, in particular on how the list of World Heritage in danger can be used to address climate change impacts to OUV, which will evolve over time. We consider it important that the process for inscribing and removing properties from the list of World Heritage in danger for reasons relating to climate change is clarified as soon as possible, so all states parties can understand the implications and the decision-making processes. I would note here that the revised climate policy does not resolve the fundamental challenge of how to address changing OUV caused by climate change. This, for us, raises questions on how a desired state of conservation might be identified and attained for a climate change affected property to be removed from the in danger list. Nor does the policy provide certainty for states parties or the committee as to the implications of in danger listing a property for reasons which are beyond the capacity of any individual state party to control. We will continue to work constructively with the World Heritage Committee on the update of this policy and with the Centre and the advisory bodies on this important initiative. And we will be submitting our proposed text amendments to address the issues I have raised for further discussion with the committee. Thank you.
I wish to thank Paula from Australia very much for her intervention. I'm sure that this will be further discussed by the World Heritage Committee. Also, I think you have seen that there is a legal framework section in the policy document which refers to Article 11.4 on danger listing in the convention itself. And if you remember, we had already, after the first policy was adopted in 2007, made changes to the operational guidelines in paragraphs 179 and 180 to include impacts of climatic and other environmental factors. But this is well noted, your comments, and I think it's very important that the committee has the full understanding of what concerns this policy and can also make the appropriate recommendations to the General Assembly. With this, do I see any further? Maybe somebody else wishes to comment. Maybe our ADG wishes to say a few words. No? Anybody else? If there is no one else who wishes to intervene, I would like to note that we had more than 120 participants at one moment. So it really shows that there is a great interest in that topic. It is certainly one of the most important topics we discuss at UNESCO on climate change. So this is very much appreciated. And with this, I would like to thank you all for your participation, for your comments, for your questions. And we will definitely discuss that further under item 7C, which is on the agenda of the World Heritage Committee. I will leave you next Sunday to go to China. I will wave from there to all of you. So it will be great to see you from online again, like today, but from another part of the world. And I would like to thank also both Rohit and Oscar, who worked really very hard with us. I would also like to thank the whole technical team. Especially, I would like to mention Stephen Oxley, who is no longer with us because he left the Australian authorities, but who really contributed very hard to this document. But I think we will see at the committee the great work which was done, and also the comments to move on this critical topic for so many World Heritage sites. Now, I think it's important for you that you have the full information in addition to the document, which is already online. And so we will also upload the PowerPoint, both in English and French, on the climate change webpage. You know, we have a special climate change webpage at the World Heritage Center's webpage. And so you can have all the background and the different documents. With this, I would like to thank all the teams, also here in the room, and our interpreters who helped us to understand each other, and our dear ADG. So have a nice afternoon, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Au revoir, à la
Thank you.
prochaine.
Bye. Thank you. Au revoir.
Thank you, Mr. Rohit.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.